Hello, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to this live webinar session. The topic will be implant restorative connection in the anterior aesthetic zone. Well, we all talk about implants, we all talk about prosthetic parts, we all talk about the restorations we place over the implants. And in today's webinar, I would like to be as simple as possible and cover a lot of daily cases we practice in our daily practice, basically, and try to share with you the small details that I'm sure will be very helpful when it comes to placing an implant. On top of that, deciding on what type of a provisional to make, and then on top of that, what kind of a restoration to make. Well, before again starting my main topic, look at this beautiful tooth shape. I don't think we cannot compare anything to the natural tooth itself. And we should always keep in mind that attached to every tooth, there is a human being. So what I'm trying to say is that let's try to save the tooth structure as much as we can. And as a last resort, like we can see in those pictures, when it is time to place an implant, then we think about placing the implants. So basically, it's a whole bundle. We have to have implants, we have to have abutments to connect it to the final restorations. Of course, the formation of the soft tissues play an amazing role in the outcome of these restorations. So it's going to be like implants, abutments, correcting the soft tissues, and the final porcelain restorations. When these are combined, we can talk about successful implant restorations. So let's start with a case we did years ago with a standard healing abutment. So this patient was our very old patient. We treated this patient basically in 1997. So he had this crown on the right upper central. However, we wanted to improve the smile. So as the basic steps we always do in our veneer cases, we mocked up the case, and then the mock-up went to the lab did us the wax up. We retried those in the patient's mouth, as we can see on the screen. Once we get the approval of the patient, we prep the teeth through the wax up, let's say the APT. The only thing we couldn't change was this huge post on tooth number 11 European, 8 American. So if we would try to remove this, the tooth would have been broken anyway. So we kept it as it is and restored it with a crown. So it was all veneers, but a single crown on that central. So years passed, 2016, the patient comes back to us. Unfortunately, that tooth was broken. There was no ferrule left. It was way inside the soft tissue. And more than that, we can see a lot of problems with the tooth itself. And when we take a close look at this, there was this vertical tooth crack that unfortunately needed the extraction of that tooth. So once we extract it, especially on the palatal side, we see this deep vertical crack extending all the way to the palate. Therefore, to start treating the case, first we digitally scan the case. The reason was at least to take the biocopy of the central if we want to redo it over the placed implant. And again, this was also a guide for us to prepare our surgical guide, so that we kept it put it aside. And then we will talk about this in the future cases, the scanning of the original teeth, the scanning of the wax up, in this case, again, the original tooth, and then the STL file creates this guide for us to place the implants. So through this guide, Professor Oral goes in with a pilot drill, just expands the hole as much as it needs, which corresponds to the diameter of the implant that we'll be placing. And again, we're placing the implant, and on the right bottom you can see he is covering up the extraction socket. For some reason we didn't want to load this implant, but rather leave it like this. So what he is doing on the right below corner is that he's taking this connective tissue graft, as you can see from this premolar zone, and then he is de-epithelializing a part of it. When I say a part of it, he is de-epithelializing this part, which is the facial and palatal, but leaves this epithelialized tissue on the area where it will be covering the socket. So this way, this is how he's gently trimming these parts and then positioning this into the socket. And once he slides the wings per se inside the socket, then he sutures them, and it's a very safe barrier to protect the implant in its position. So this is a weeks later. We see healing, start of the healing. 6 weeks, it's pretty much healed. We have a very nice, very thick ridge, a very lucky case to work with, thick biotype, thick ridge, and then 16 weeks later, it's ready to be loaded. So as you can see, we have a provisional, like a Maryland bridge, which is covering up just the aesthetic part. And then this is the condition, the implant over this Maryland bridge per se. And finally, we will go into that. So Junaid is punching the hole, reaching to the implant head, and then we're placing a tie base, and we are getting ready to make a digital impression. So you can go two ways in those cases. You can either go digital, just like you see here with a tie base, or you can simply go in an analog way, the conventional way, so that you can make a normal silicone impression. Open tray, closed tray, your preference. In this case, we prefer to go digital. So we will make the custom design of this emergence profile by digital means, and we will try to copy the root of the extracted tooth. So how do we go into that procedure? Well, we will go back to the library, which we did the CBCT, the scanning of the patient, and with the softwares available here today, we will simply put it into the in-lab program in this case. And now you can see when we strip the roots out of the bone, we can see the roots superimposed over the teeth that we plan to design. But look at here, I mean, the way the software programs it is like the sort of standard way. However, when we see the root surface here, it's only concave, not convex. Therefore, we should be working on designing this creating this concavity, which will have a better support for the soft tissue subgingivally. And basically, this is how digitally but manually we're reshaping the emergence profile. And as you can see here, this is the final design. And we will first use this final design as a whole for our provisional. And this green line here that you see, this is for defining the abutment margin when we will split the abutment and the crown to build up the final design. So this is the provisional we made immediately from Telio CAD. We just CAD/CAM milled it, and the machine exactly mills the design that we already did in a digital platform. And you see the beautiful soft tissue level here. It's plenty. All we needed to do is, with the shape we created as an emergence profile, to give the exact shape of this socket. And then, if the patient likes the outcome, we will go with simple steps. Now, with the digital softwares, we can so easily adjust the bite, as you can see here. It emphasizes the contacts in red, which are strong. Some softer contacts. We just need to play our game depending on the bite of the patient. And more importantly, when we come up with this final design, then we go back to the software and do the abutment design. And in the middle, you can see it is morphing the abutment from inside this main shape, meaning that if we want to make a longer design, we can always extend it towards the coronal. If we want it narrower, we can do this. So it's just like a typical math that we want to come up with when we're designing this case. And finally, it will mill the crown and the abutment separately. So this is the abutment that we milled out of Emacs CAD. So when we're ready, happy with that, we sinter it, and then over the tie base, we just bond it. And on top of this bond abutment, this is the crown, again from Emacs. This is LTA1 color, non-sintered. Once we do the surface texture, simple enough, we will put it into sintering. And once it's sintered, with the typical steps that we all know, we will cement this crown over the abutment. First, we'll cleanse the surface, and then we will acid etch it, depending on the material you use. For Emacs, we need it like 20 seconds. And then we will use the silane and the bonding, and we will bond this crown over the abutment. And the same thing goes true for the inside of the crown. We will acid etch, we will use silane, bond, and the luting resin. The small difference here is that because we're bonding these two outside, we have the chance of cleansing and polishing everything outside of the mouth. Well, the reason why guided surgery is very important is that as long as the bone allows us, or we take care of the surgical part, we always want our restorations to be retrievable, screw retained. So this is a great chance because we don't disturb the tissue anymore. So once this veneer is done, as you can see on the left side of the screen, this was pre-extraction when the patient first came to us. And on the right side, we see day of insertion. We still need the maturation of the soft tissues. And this is the implant with a tie base on top of that. So once we have this, I know from day one that if this is the bone peak in here, which corresponds to this level, to the lateral, the papilla between the lateral and central, I know that at least with maturation, we'll have another like 2 to 2.5 millimeters growth. And on the mesial papilla, the same thing. So all I need to do is to wait until this matures. And this is what happens in a week. And this is like 3 months. And we need some more maturation to see the final result in the coming years. Now, sometimes we use the natural tooth as a provisional. As we can see here, highly affected tooth with an internal resorption. This is what we have to deal with. Besides this part, the patient has like a small gummy smile problem. She's happy with the teeth, even though they are not the ideal aesthetic in the aesthetic design. However, the plan for this case is to place an implant into tooth number 11, take care of the gummy smile. Well, before we start the case, I'm making a silicone key out of the existing condition, meaning to secure the position of this single central, which I will be using as a provisional after we place the implants. So now what we're doing is extracting the tooth, and you see the problem areas here. We're taking a connective tissue graft from the palate. Using the M-guide, we will be placing our implant. And again, always place the drill and place the implant through the M-guide. Sometimes in my videos, you'll see that we go through the guide, drill the bone through the guide, freehand place the implant, which is wrong. I mean, the implantologist I work with, be it Puyu Nicolescu or Eric Van Doren, of course, Junaid Oral, they're so experienced surgeons, so they can do it. But the main message should be also, as we go through the guide for drilling the bone, we should also place the implant through the bone. And once we position it right, as we can see here, we have plenty of space now for bone and soft tissue augmentation. And this is what Junaid is doing in this case. And as he is doing this, I'm getting the crown that we extracted, creating a ditch back in here on the palatal surface, close to the gingival area, just to create a space to bond this metal wire so that I can be using this as a Maryland bridge. And then after surgery, when we close the hole, I bring this index that we created in the beginning, and I'm now using the natural tooth as a Maryland bridge. So as you can see here, the implant is placed. It's just covered here. We didn't do anything for the abutment, the emergence profile. The provisional is covered on top of that. And this is like 6 months later. And now we start molding the tissue. How do we do this? By adding some composite between the provisional and the implant head, and we try to morph this out. Well, you can most of the time get very good results, but to do that, on top of what I waited, I needed to wait another 2 months plus 4 appointments to remold the socket until it comes to its ideal shape. At the same time, we're doing some apical crown lengthening to level up the soft tissues, even if we're not going to do any veneers. This alignment itself, we know will create a big difference in the aesthetic outcome. So this crown lengthening is done, so we need to wait another 2 months for that to completely heal. And here is the final situation. The soft tissues are aligned perfectly. The provisional tooth is in the mouth, but this time it is loaded on the implant, and in this zone we are forming a very nice subgingival contour of the socket. And we see how much soft tissue we have in this zone just because we augmented it properly with bone and soft tissues. And this is the final healthy shape of this socket. Again, we provided that with this composites we added, subtracted, and shaped throughout the journey. And from inside, outside, wherever you want, look at this. I think this is a very successful socket formation. And then what we have to do here is to go to the lab stage. In the lab, Mr. Taylan Sarı, who is doing this case, is choosing the abutment of choice with a highest value that we can use, for the simple reason that whatever we add from a prosthetic point of view, we add as more we add as porcelain on the crown, the lower the values go. So let's start with a high value and see what happens. And when that's the case, when it is a single tooth, either on a very darkly surfaced tooth surface or like a very opaque abutment like this, trying to match it with the adjacent teeth is, I think, one of the hardest tasks that a technician can face. So what we do, again, we choose the highest value, and these are the parts that we're using. This is the abutment that we're using. This is the final design that we want to end up with, and this is the cutback design out of this, which we took into milling, so that the porcelain will be laid on top of this to come back into this major form. Well, I don't want to get into detail of this. This is sort of an implant lecture, but if you use these cross-polarized filters for your flash, over your flash, and make polarized pictures, and if the lab is well aware of this LEB technique that was given to us by Shine, Javier, and Bazos, and this reads the L, the value, A, the redness, and B, the yellow colors of the tooth, and these are the values you see on the top. Gradually the lab is building the layers, and then when you match these two, they are very, very, very similar. So the very talented ceramist who use this technique, it's like flying in a cockpit without seeing anything, just flying with the altimeters, all these things in front of you, but they know what they are doing. So once they get these values very similar to each other, creating a concrete delta E, then they will have to bring this tooth only, and you only need to screw this in. And look at the similarity, the color matching of these two teeth, or the single crown compared to the other. I think it's very, very successful. Well, what about a customized healing abutment unloaded? Well, look at this case. The patient has a lot of bone resorption, trauma. Again, this was a case we did a single crown years ago. He's breaking this the second time. We see almost no bone on the facial side of this. So what we have to do is simply go ahead and extract it. But before doing this, what I do is simply prep the teeth like as if I'm gonna just recap it, and then I prepare a provisional. This provisional is exact copy of his old crown from impression transferring into over the prep teeth. This you can easily get. And then we go into tooth extraction very meticulously. I think all the surgeons watching me, I'm not a surgeon, but will agree with me that extracting this tooth is more delicate than placing the implant. It's more difficult. So once we extract this, we will create our surgical guide, or place our surgical guide into the place. And then, just like we mentioned again, we will drill this socket for the implant. And after placing the implant, what I'm doing is I'm copying the existing root shape. So what is this? I made the provisional. I take the provisional out. I extract the tooth, and then this extracted tooth goes back into the impression that we took before. So it's like transferring the implant analog into our stone model. So this is the extracted tooth in our stone model. So what this creates me is that when we re-extract it from the model per se and create this pink that will help us big time when we're designing our final restoration in the laboratory, this is mimicking exactly what we had in the mouth when this tooth with this root existed. So this is the original shape of the root, and we're transferring this into the model. So one last thing we have to do, this is the socket that we duplicated in the model, and on top of this we are creating a Duralay for the transfer of this. How does it work? Very simple. Look at the size of this socket, okay? And then when I will carry it all the way to the left hand side, we see that even in this few minutes when we are placing the impression piece over the implant, look at the downsizing, the collapsing of the socket. Already it's way narrow than what we transferred into the stone model. So if we didn't, the final outcome would have come as narrow as this. So if we go back to what we did in the lab, this is the Duralay that we prepared, as you can see. Once the impression copying is placed, then we attach it, we capture it over this Duralay. So as you can see, this is the part that we captured, and then we take this impression copying together with the Duralay that we created from the beginning. So this is our impression copying attached to the Duralay. The next step is taking this piece into the lab and positioning it exactly to the socket that we created, and the wings of the Duralay will stabilize the implant exactly at where it should be, as you can see here. Then this gives us the chance to build up the rest of the part from the head of the implant all the way up to the gingiva, copying exactly the shape of the original root surface. So it's root form into the abutment emergence profile. So we should get rid of the corners, just soften these parts, and then go from as narrow as possible towards a wide outcome. Well, after this, why do we do this? Well, for the simple reason that if we had only used a standard healing cap like we did in the previous cases, it is okay, but once the site is healed, we would have only that much of space retained in the socket. And then when we wanted to get the final design, again, every time it will take like 3-4 times of approaches like we tried in the past case. So gradually we would reshape the soft tissue until we would get to the exact root design. However, instead of that, at this stage, if we create this customized healing abutment, it will be very easy to hold it in the socket and keep the shape of the socket exactly the way we would want to. So Eric, after he placed the implant, as I'm doing the abutment in the laboratory next door, Eric is placing the bone grafts and soft tissue grafts into the socket. So this is the socket with this small piece of abutment, customized abutment we created, which is immediately placed into the socket. Even though we will not be able to load the implant, we are still using a customized abutment design to keep the soft tissue in its ideal position, and then the rest will be placing again another Maryland bridge which mimics his original teeth, but as you can see, slightly shorter on the incisal edge to prevent it from breaking with the posterior moments of the patient. So this is 1 week healing, this is like 1 month, this is like 5 months. The tissue is maturing perfectly, and just because we transferred the root surface in the root shape perfectly into the patient's socket, so 5 months after maturation we will simply be taking this out. And technically, even if we didn't make an impression because of the transfer with the Gurel, we could have finished our final restoration. But just to make sure and pay attention to how nice the tissue has healed in that zone, well, what we do is we test the provisional in the patient's mouth, and if it's okay, either we will make a new impression, or if it's fitting perfectly okay, we will just use the same impression, same transfer to finalize the final crown. So this is the provisional that we're trying in, and it seems beautiful. And then we place the implant, and this is the condition of the implant after 10 months. Well, this is the abutment type, which is customized but unloaded. So these are the series that we follow. What about customized healing abutment with natural tooth, this time loaded? Well, again, another patient of ours, almost the same case. He had a crown on the right upper central. Well, we wish it was staying in his mouth, but as you can see, he had a trauma, he had some problems in that tooth, and we needed to extract it. As you can see, there is a big resorption in this zone. This tooth needed to be extracted, and look at the things, the inflamed soft tissues coming out. Well, after we extract this tooth, now I'm going back to the extracted tooth itself, and as Junaid is placing the implant through the guide, this time also placing the implant, not only drilling but placing the implant through the guide, we can see how nicely it's positioned. I am now going to place my new provisional over the provisional abutment that we placed to the head of the implant. So this is the tooth that I cut from the root surface and connected this with the standard platform, over the standard platform that MIS is supporting us. And what happens here is that the 3 important steps I need to take care of when I'm building the crown and connection of the emergence profile to the implant. So this is the zone that the provisional emerges from the implant surface, the platform. This is the area which will stay under the soft tissue, and this is the area which will indicate the end portion of the most apical portion of my crown, the way it blends to the soft tissue. So what is important here is to take care of this zone, and this zone should always be kept in a concave version. So this way the soft tissue will be more stable in these areas. And this is how I'm placing my provisional, which is exactly the same crown the patient used to have before we started. Now look at the immediate soft tissue volume we have at the day of surgery. And you get the beautiful blend of this provisional with the implant itself. Well, this is healing after some time, like after 6 months. Now the patient also wants to improve the smile as we go along this way. So I'm doing the mock-up, just defining the final outcome before we start even prepping the teeth. So we place the APT. This is the final design, which the patient is happy with. And I will simply prep through the APT, try to be as minimal as possible, and then these are the final crowns and veneers combined we do, and the crown on tooth number 11, 8 is on top of an implant, and I think it's a very good integration. Of course, the tissue needs maturation for a long time, but I think the shape of the tooth, which is, as a matter of fact, indicated by the soft tissue around it, just because we managed to keep the papilla on both sides and the buccolingual volume of this soft tissue, this is what plays an amazing role on the final outcome, the successful final outcome of this case. And as you can see, we make use of the intercrestal bone on the other central and the lateral and utilize it until its total limits. Now, changing the gingival contour on a natural way. Well, a very complex case. The patient comes to the office with this now other central, tooth number 9 or 21 in Europe, hyper mobile. It was not really terribly infected, but it was hypermobile, and of course a part of it was due to his bite. He is a class 2 patient, and look at the rotation and the way it's protruding out. So there's almost no bone support left there, and we decided to extract it. Well, again, like we did in our previous cases, just maybe to use his own tooth as a provisional, I just wanted to make an impression, but look how carefully I'm making this impression. I have a nylon laid over the silicone so that the silicone won't cover the interproximal embrasures. I can make sure that if I did it like this, and when I take the impression out, the tooth would have come out so easily. So this is, we bonded the two teeth together, and then this is how we made the impression. And then we are now preparing the adjacent tooth, which already had crowns on top of them, and this is the way we continue. The other central had a crown, the laterals had veneers previously. So as you can see, step by step, I'm finalizing my preps, and on the central and lateral, we sort of finished the preps, and now it's time for me to deal with this central. Why? Because of its position. Look how protruded that tooth is. It's hypermobile, it's going back and forth, but this is like the most stable position of that tooth. Now, what happens when that's the case? Well, this is what happens. According to the tooth position, the soft tissue moves. How does it move? Let's see. This is a normal tooth position, right? And this is the soft tissue. If for some reason this tooth is palatally bended, tilted, more likely the soft tissue has a tendency to grow coronal. On the other side, if it's flared out, it's most likely that the soft tissue will go apical. And we can easily see it when we're shaping the contours of our restorations that sit on the implants. if we exaggerate this, immediately the tissue escapes. So it's the same patient, same tooth, only because of the different positioning, you can see three different heights of the soft tissue. And this is what holds true in this case. Look at the emergence of this tooth from the alveolar bone, and you see the tissue is way up. So what I'm going to do is I will start getting rid of this part to see how the soft tissue will react. This was the decision we took with Eric Van Doren while doing this case. And this is what I did prosthetically, just remove it out, so that pretend as if this tooth is in the same buccal position, but my prep was not limited to the actual gingival margin. It was way in, at least like 5-6 millimeters way in, where the tissue was loose anyways, to see if the tissue will collapse and come more coronal. And this is what I'm doing. Probably I'm prepping this teeth all the way up to here from under the soft tissue. And this is the final situation. So on top of this, as you can see here, this is what I'm trying to mention. I have gone all the way in, prepping it in this direction. Before it was coming out like this. We prepare a 4-unit provisional bridge, and we are placing this, and you see how the root surface is standing outside of this surface, and simple enough. This is the provisional the minute we placed it, but look at the maturation in a month's time. Look at this area here and see how the tissue collapsed and closed this gap. I think we should always give a chance to the soft tissues if something is obstructing it to come back to its original place. So once we take the provisionals out, Eric is just trying to figure out the depths of the socket, extracting the tooth. This was an unsavable tooth, and then trying to find where the bone is, and simply placing our V3 into the socket. And you see the tremendous amount of area here that he needs to fill up with bone and soft tissue simultaneously. So first, of course, he's placing the implant, and after that what I do is the bridge that we used to have, creating a space on the palatal side of this and trying to capture it. So as you can see, this is not fully seated, just to show you the connection in this zone. What we will try to do is to adapt it into this implant head. So this is the provisional we had, and look what happens here. This is very important for all the prosthodontists and the implantologists to define the area which will dictate your soft tissue if you have properly augmented the space or not. So what happens is that this is the incisal edge that corresponds to our provisional. This is the area where the facial side is the thickest. This is the critical zone that dictates sort of the gingival outcome. And from anything from here on, we should create a nice concavity so that we'll have a very stable soft tissue that is sitting on the gingival margin of the crown. So as I'm doing this, Eric is placing the soft tissue, and then we place the provisional on top of this. This is the screw retained provisional, 2 weeks. You see how nice the soft tissue is healing on the palatal. 4 months, we see a slight tissue recession in this zone. And then simply, because of the form we created from the beginning, the soft tissue is healing perfectly. Now, one last thing we have to do in this case is to open the bite. Why? Well, first to set the aesthetic plane of occlusion in the right way, and more important than that, because of the deep bite he had. Look how his previous teeth were 6 months ago. They were like protruding out like crazy. But once we open the bite, we can simply take these teeth in because now we have the space between the lower incisors and the upper incisors. So this is the new set of provisionals. One thing we have seen is that in his smile, this is being like slightly gummy on this side. So we just pinpoint the areas to be lengthened. We do a simple classic gingivectomy, osseous recontouring, apical crown lengthening, and this is now in a very better and solid position. So from here on, always the same for myself, prep through the APT. I'm just prepping through the APT regardless if it's an implant, veneer, or whatever. And then I needed to transfer this beautiful shape into my impression. So what I do is I just fill a tray with a light body and heavy body silicone, dip this thing all the way into this socket, and simple enough, when it's set and when we take this out, look what happens in this socket. It is all the shape of my emergence profile. Then I attach the transfer analog and start filling this up with composite. Light cure it, and when I take this out, this is the beautiful shape of the emergence profile that we meticulously try to create since the beginning. So how do I use it? Simply try it in the mouth first. If it fits okay, I carry it back to the laboratory. The lab builds everything through that, and this is the beautiful final result of this very, very difficult looking case. So this was before on the left. This is how nicely the implant and veneers are positioned in the place. This is from the other side. Look how protruded the left central was, and now how beautifully not only the buccolingual version but also mesiodistal soft tissue, the vertical soft tissues were aligned, and this is from the facial beginning and the after. So this was a great work of Hilal Kuday, a great ceramist that we have been working since many, many years. And I would like to thank all the ceramists that has been in this presentation and in my life, because without them, I wouldn't be where I am right now. And this is the beautiful improvement of this patient in here. Now, what about the connect? I think this was a brilliant idea. You see all these abutments, which I will share you in a second. And let me walk you through this case to better explain this to you. So this patient had a bridge on left central, a pontic, which she is not very happy of. And we will be on the left lateral. So what we will be doing is to try to equalize everything and just place an implant into this lateral tooth number 22 or whatever, left lateral. So we drill it through the guide, we place the implant through the guide, and this is the connect I am mentioning to you. It has different lengths, and as you can see here, what we have to do is to connect it into the implant itself at the point at the appointment of implant is positioned. And this is amazing because we can torque it like with 30 newtons, and all of a sudden this implant becomes like a one-piece implant. And more important than that, it becomes like a tissue level implant rather than a bone level implant, because once we torque it, even though we we prefer not to touch it again until the end of the whole treatment. So what we do is I just add the part that I would build my provisional on, got it into the right spot, got my provisional seated on that with a big hole inside, which is positioned over the canine, so it sits exactly in the stable position that it should. And you see the connect in here, which gives me this extra beautiful contour that will carry all the procedure up to the soft tissue level. So we place the provisional, we capture it with composite, and this is what we do. And the beauty here is that let the connect take care of this part, which I didn't need to worry about, and I will only deal with the 1 millimeter coronal part, this part, to give the final shape so that the gingival margin of my provisional will set the tone for the final aesthetic design. So meanwhile, Junaid is placing the soft tissue into the area, and this is the abutment that I immediately screw in. So how this happened? We had this connect, as you see in the bottom side of the screen, and because of that, since it covers all the area beyond this place, what happens is that I only need to deal with this 1 millimeter bend that I need to give the final contour of my soft tissue. If for some reason we wouldn't be able to load the implant immediately, well, I would still recommend you to use the connect, for the simple reason that you can then have the screw to tighten it up, to seal it, and then place it over the connect and just submerge this into under the soft tissue. At least when you go in 6 months later, 3 months later, you will already have this 2/3 of this soft tissue, at least 2-3 millimeters, is already positioned, shaped perfectly. And again, then you would need to deal with the small part in this zone. So this is the the provisional. You see the big improvement in the soft tissue in that zone. And then this is the patient right after the surgery. And then we're making the digital impression of this, and we finish this case with CAD/CAM milling monolithic veneers from beginning to the end. Look at this design here. If I back it up, this is exactly what we need. So everything here is taken care of the connect, and we only have to deal with this 1 millimeter just to define the gingival margins. And doing so, this is the outcome. Look at the level of this lateral, exactly the way we would want to. So this is all the steps with the X-ray, the beginning, the connect, provisional on top of the connect, and the final veneer, final crown on top of that. And when you look at the arch position, everything is perfectly balanced, and I think a happy patient after all. Well, with this last case, I want to wrap up with a patient coming for an aesthetic result. She's basically happy with the look of her lateral on the left side. However, when we look carefully, when we analyze carefully, we see a huge midline shift towards one side. And as you can see, this is the facial midline and the upper dental midline. She had tooth number 24, the first molar missing on the left side of the maxilla. So this is the scenery of the case. There is an injured tooth surface on the lateral, black showing through, and the patient is unhappy. Well, the first thing I needed to do is a mock-up. And look how facial integration is important. I don't care. Implant case, veneer case, crown and bridge case. This looks beautiful. If I would show you this picture, you would say, why don't you go ahead? And a small detail here, besides what I did as the shape, to have the shape, new shapes of the teeth, I placed some pink here to show the patient what will happen if somehow we got rid of this black and bring this soft tissue down. Well, from this picture it looks great, but when I go into the face with the lips, we see slightly shifted midline, but when we orient it with her face, we can see everything is shifted. So this is why we urge her to get into ortho. Nuno Diaz, great orthodontist that we've been working since many years. He takes care of the case at this moment and see how much it's progressing and all his efforts to bring the midline into the position. Now we see a gap between that tooth, the lateral and the central, after the centrals are moved towards the midline. So, as you can see the same space here, now we have to make a move on the lateral. Well, the move will be to close this gap, and you see that this tooth needs to be extracted anyways. So if you can say, if we're going to extract it, why is this effort? Well, all these efforts is to move the bone and the soft tissue to the ideal position so that after extraction we'll create the best socket space for that new implant. So it's not only closing this space, but rather extruding this tooth the same time, as you can see on the X-ray also, to bring the soft tissue and the bone down, and see how successful Nuno is bringing all this stuff down. So with the extrusion of tooth number 20, as you see here, see how much bone we are bringing down together with the soft tissue, and look at the crest of the intercrestal bone and the space we created in between. All this refers to an amazing papillary formation. So this is the interproximal bone that we created. After that, it's the extraction, it's the healing, waiting for the healing, guided implant placement with MIS, and as you can see here, this is the final bony structure. Again, we go into this, Junaid goes into this surgery, just places the implant. The chosen implant is MIS V3, 3.3, 13 millimeters, and now he places the connect on top of that. Well, this is the part, as I mentioned you before. What happens here, this is the advantages of using connect. First of all, once it's screwed in, tightened over the implant, it creates a platform switch immediately in that zone. This is the first advantage of that. And when we get closer to that and try to relate it to the final shape of the crown that we'll be placing here, the head of the implant to the gingival zenith of the tooth should be approximately 3 millimeters. Well, if we were not using the connect, we would be fighting, try to mold all this emergence profile, adding composite, subtracting composite, adding, subtracting, trying to find the correct way. However, and also the other thing is that because of this very tight connection here with the implant itself, it is changing this bone level connection into a soft tissue level connection, meaning that whenever we will re-enter to the site, we are not going to be going all the way down to the implant head, but only to this zone, which is much more coronal. So let's say in this 3 millimeter space between the implant and the crown, we use a 2 millimeter connect. All we have to deal is about this single millimeter, and which is way easier for any dentist to carve rather than trying to fit everything all the way down to the implant head. So this is the X-ray that we can see with the connect attached to the implant. And meanwhile, as Junaid was doing this, we were doing the Maryland provisional. But if you take a look at this, there's a huge gap between the lateral and the canine. Well, the reason is that we all wanted to build up the exact final shape or space of this lateral and then try to capture it. Again, we open the palatal side, we place it over the provisional abutment. You see we will be capturing it, and the wings are providing us with the most stable position of this lateral. We light cure it, we take this out, and now simply in the lab we are drilling a hole into this stereolithic model representing the position of the implant. We're securing this with composite, and this is the zone that we will be dealing with, just like I mentioned previously. So this is only this 1 millimeter that we have to match, and once we do this, we're just cutting the wings away and placing this into the patient's mouth. Now I send the patient back to Nuno, and what Nuno has to do is orthodontically start closing this gap. So first he moves the canine towards the lateral, and then moves the premolar towards the canine. So without opening an extra step there, by moving the posterior teeth mesially, he closes this gap, and this is the final result. And see, when he takes the braces out, beautiful, beautiful outcome. We have more than plenty of space in that zone, which the root was exposed and it was almost up in this level. Thanks to ortho for bringing everything down, thanks to augmentation that builds up the soft tissue, thanks to connect and the way we shape the soft tissue at time of surgery to give us all the support for such a design. And this is the space, extra space we gained when we compare this to this lateral. So this way, this is the bone we had, and simple enough, this is the final result when it comes to my provision. Well, we're just treating this patient, so we stopped here because we need to just replace this with a porcelain crown. It's gonna be peanuts. The main goal was to set this, but when we want to see the difference between previously the beginning of the case and this final, is that look at the position of the teeth. This is the true midline, all the way shifted. This is the vertical line. You see the lateral, the zenith of the lateral showing through, and when we superimpose it with the final, look how much space we gain and make these equal with the other lateral. Well, this case will be continued, and hopefully I'll share you the final results when we finish the porcelain work. With that, I would like to thank all of you for being with me in this lecture, and hope to see you in another webinar sometime. Thank you. I'll be here if you have any questions for me. Okay. Thank you for your thank you wishes. In between, I'll try to find out some questions. Why the wings necessary on the temporary? Well, it's a great question for two reasons. If you haven't decided whether to go immediate loading or delayed loading, so when you create this with the wings, and if you cannot load your implant immediately, you can simply use your pontic or the middle part of the Maryland bridge as a pontic. You still do your customized abutment, but then you use it as a Maryland bridge, which will only stay there aesthetically. However, if you are going to load your implant, then what you have to do is you have to empty the inside of the pontic, right? And if you didn't have the wings, the only way you can position your crown over the provisional metal abutment is that just by guessing it. So it's like either better like this or not. However, if you have the wings will be very stable on the adjacent tooth. That will give you the exact positioning of the provisional. And once you capture it with the provisional abutment, then this is exactly where your provisional will be. And then furthermore, if you take this out of the implant in the mouth, and with the wings, if you seat it on the stereolithic model, then it is in a way transferring everything related to the implants into your stereolithic model. So that means once you fix the transfer analog through that into the stereolithic model, it's almost like making the impression of the implant. So once you fix it there, then you can always go ahead and cut the wings and further continue. So this is basically why we use the wings. Let's see some other questions. Thank you, presenter. What do you think about producing and placing the final custom abutment? According to the abutment, according to one abutment, one time. Well, the rest of the question I couldn't read. What I understand is that you're asking me why don't you finish your final everything the day of implant placement. Well, first of all, even if we load the implant, the surface, the palatinal or occlusal surface of the implant should be free of any contact. So we cannot give the final palatal design or occlusal design to the abutment or final implant, final restoration if we immediately load the implant. So this is number one issue. Second issue or second question, as far as I understand from here, is that you are asking going in and out to the socket. This is right. This is absolutely correct. This is why abutments like Connect or multi-unit is extremely useful here, because once you tighten it up, you don't need to take it out. You carry everything to the soft tissue level, and all you need to do is play with the 1 millimeter, which will be in very, very safe limits. Is digital impression better on anterior implant sites? Well, it's just up to you. I mean, you can go analog, you can go digital, but today with the help of lots of digital softwares, it's easier to build up the emergence profiles, and on top of the abutment form and the crown itself, like I showed in my, I guess it was the first case or second case. So going digital will be the future very, very soon. But if you don't have the digital means to transfer it, it's not the end of the world. You can still go analog, like the way I showed you in one of my cases, creating this Duralay, transferring everything back and forth from lab to the office. Okay, what is APT? This is what I came out years ago on Prospart. This is the transfer of the wax up over the patient's existing teeth, which gives you the exact final shape of your veneers in the beginning. So this is the best way. It's referred to aesthetic pre-evaluative temporaries. So you place the wax up, you transfer the wax up into the patient's mouth before you even prep the teeth. So once the patient loves this aesthetic design, you leave it on the tooth and start prepping it through that. This APT giving you the most rigid and most stable guidance for you to prep through. And this way you prep the teeth and you will be minimally invasive and yet create the best space for the dental lab to build up the veneers. Well, I think we're running out of time. Um, I would like to thank all of you who has been with me tonight. Uh, and if you have any questions, just email us. Thank you so much.